Case-Steno peeps, Jen back with a brand new dictation. Today we're going to do a Q&A between an attorney and an officer on a drug bust involving methamphetamine leading to a shootout. Oh, the drama. This will be at no particular speed. I will speak in a low voice for the attorney, a high voice for the officer. Let's get started. Officer Reynolds, can you please state your full name and rank for the record? Officer Matthew Reynolds, Senior Patrol Officer, LAPD Narcotics Division. Thank you, Officer Reynolds. Let's get right to the incident on June 14th, 2024. You were involved in a drug bust at 1478 East Maple Avenue, Los Angeles, correct? Yes, that's correct. Can you please describe what you and your team were doing at that location that evening? We were executing a search warrant at 1478 East Maple Avenue as part of an ongoing investigation into a methamphetamine distribution ring. We had reason to believe the house was being used as a processing and distribution center. What time did you and your team arrive at the residence? We arrived at approximately 7:45 p.m. Can you walk us through what happened after you arrived? Upon arrival, we set up a perimeter around the house. At around 8 p.m., we made entry. 2 officers approached the front door while I and 3 others covered the back. As soon as we breached the front door, we were met with gunfire from inside the residence. So the suspects opened fire immediately? Yes, shots were fired from within the living room area. It was clear they knew we were coming, possibly from surveillance cameras we later found around the perimeter. How many suspects were inside at that time? There were 3 individuals, Michael Torres, Daniel Martinez, and a third man, later identified as Jose Ramirez. When the shooting started, did you and your team return fire? Yes, once we were fired upon, my partner, Officer Jacobs, returned fire to protect the team. I moved to secure the back of the house where I encountered Ramirez, who was attempting to flee with a firearm. What happened when you encountered Mr. Ramirez? I ordered him to drop his weapon, but he pointed it in my direction. At that point, I fired 2 shots, hitting him in the shoulder and leg. He went down, and I secured the weapon before handcuffing him. How long did the shootout last? It was brief, no more than 2 to 3 minutes. After the suspects were detained, what did you find inside the house? We found a large quantity of methamphetamine, around 25 pounds, in several plastic bags, along with drug paraphernalia and a small lab for manufacturing. There were also several firearms, including 2 AR-15s and a shotgun. Were there any injuries to officers during the incident? Officer Jacobs was grazed by a bullet, but it was not serious. He was treated at the scene. After the scene was secured, what time did you leave the residence? We left around midnight after the crime scene unit arrived to process the evidence. Thank you, Officer Reynolds. Now, following the shootout, you mentioned you found approximately 25 pounds of methamphetamine. Can you describe where the drugs were located in the house? Yes, the methamphetamine was found in multiple locations. Most of it was stored in the kitchen area inside a false bottom cabinet. We also found smaller amounts in the garage where a small processing lab had been set up. When you say processing lab, what exactly did you find in that area? The garage contained several items commonly used to manufacture methamphetamine, including glass beakers, chemical solvents, and heating elements. There was also a ventilation system rigged to remove fumes from the area, which is typical for meth labs. Was anyone else present during the raid aside from the 3 suspects you mentioned? No, just the 3 suspects. We had received intelligence that no civilians were expected to be on site during the time of the raid. Were you able to determine whether the suspects had prior knowledge of the raid? Based on the security cameras we found and the rapid response from the suspects, we believe they had been tipped off. It's possible they were monitoring police radio frequencies or had received information from an insider. Let's talk about the suspects' weapons. You mentioned AR-15s, a shotgun, and other firearms. Were these weapons registered? None of the weapons we recovered were registered. In fact, several of them had serial numbers that had been filed off, which indicates they were either stolen or obtained through illegal means. Did any of the suspects appear to be under the influence of methamphetamine at the time of the arrest? Yes, Michael Torres appeared to be under the influence. He was erratic, aggressive, and sweating profusely. His behavior was consistent with methamphetamine use. How did the crime scene unit process the house once the area was secured? The crime scene unit entered after we had the suspects in custody and had conducted a preliminary sweep. They photographed the scene, collected evidence, and took samples from the meth lab for further analysis. It took several hours to process the entire house. Officer Reynolds, after the shootout and arrest, was anyone from the local community interviewed regarding the house at 1478 East Maple Avenue? Yes, several neighbors were interviewed. Some reported suspicious activity at the house, such as late-night visitors and unusual smells, which are often associated with meth production. One neighbor even mentioned hearing gunfire several nights prior. Were there any prior complaints about the house before this incident? There had been anonymous tips submitted about possible drug activity in the area, but no formal complaints had been filed. That's what prompted us to begin surveillance about a month prior to the raid. Following the raid, what were the charges filed against the suspects? All 3 suspects were charged with possession with intent to distribute methamphetamine, operating a meth lab, unlawful possession of firearms, and attempted murder of law enforcement officers. Thank you, Officer Reynolds. Just a few more questions. Were any steps taken to ensure the meth lab was decontaminated? Yes, once the crime scene unit finished their work, a hazmat team was brought in to safely dismantle the lab and decontaminate the property. The house was declared a biohazard site and is currently undergoing remediation. Lastly, Officer Reynolds, based on your professional opinion, how significant was this bust in terms of disrupting local methamphetamine distribution? This was a major bust. Taking 25 pounds of methamphetamine off the streets along with the arrest of key figures in the operation will significantly disrupt the local distribution network. It will likely take some time for other players to fill the void left by this bust. All right, that was a long one, so that hopefully got you some endurance as well as working on Q&A, because I tell you what, the dang Q&A gets me every time. So hang in there if you're struggling with Q&A. You are not alone on that roller coaster. But be sure to keep practicing your Q&As, and I will catch you on the next dictation.